It happens. Thank you so much for coming on. I just kind of briefly, I think, butchered the name of the project, and now your name as well. So tell us, it is the Ex-Hijabi Photo Fashion Journal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and your blog is A Veil in a Dark Place. So tell us a little bit about why you began this project and what you hope to accomplish.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a spur of the moment idea. I was talking to my friend Reem, who's also an ex-hijabi and an activist and an asylum seeker here in the U.S. And we were just chatting about some things, and she was talking about how this summer is the first time she actually can go swimming in public. And we were talking about the sort of like how it's, you know, it's really complex, because on the one hand it's wonderful to be able to be out and like feel the sun and the wind and the water all over your body, you know, and then at the same time, you know, buying a bathing suit and having such a publicly visible body for the first time, it's hard to kind of like ease into, and you know, we get to be really self-conscious about it. Then we were talking about it, and we kind of like, you know, we're able to get to this headspace where we were just like really happy with who we were, and we started taking selfies of ourselves in our bikinis, and then and we were just thinking that, you know, wouldn't it be nice if there was a space where everyone who wanted to do this, everyone who, you know, who had sort of grown up or lived a life where they were required to adhere to all these modesty doctrines and have sort of felt this shame and denigration attached to their bodies, where they could have a space to celebrate. And that was basically how the idea started. It took a few days to sort of like try to think about all the details, like who would be allowed in, would it only be people who used to wear the hijab, would there be other requirements, would we have like sort of aesthetic requirements, and so on. And I sort of built an FAQ page, and then I sort of just launched this sort of proposal on my blog to see who was interested. And, you know, and it was kind of a spur of the moment thing that I just like sort of made the website one evening, and I knew that I only had a couple of submissions, and then it just took off. And the next day I had 4 new stories with, you know, of women and their sort of journeys and their sort of understanding of their sort of bodily journeys. And now it's gaining traction. It's really great.
That's awesome. What are some of the, pardon me, themes that you're seeing in the submissions?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of focus on pain, which I think is not at odds with the concept that we want to celebrate our bodies. Because one of the reasons I kind of wanted to create this journal, and I mentioned this in my interview that came out in Vice yesterday, is that it's a space of healing. It's a space where women finally have finally feel that they can talk about these things that have happened to them, you know, where not only, you know, are their words welcomed, but they're understood, and they're among people who, you know, who know exactly what's going on with them. So we have women talking about, you know, exactly how the sort of suppression and restriction that they grew up with, or that was imposed upon them, you know, how it affected them, the way their families reacted, the way that overcome this sort of shame and denigration. And I don't think that focusing on that is a bad thing. I think it, you know, I think it helps deal with it. And at the same time, you know, they would go from talking about how painful it was to talking about how wonderful it is that they, you know, that they can just be out in the sunlight, feel the sun on their skin and their hair right now, which is wonderful. I also think that the focus on the pain is, I think it's made easier by the fact that we're trying to be a very welcoming and encompassing journal. We're trying to be a journal that doesn't, you know, place restrictions on race or size or age or gender identity. You don't actually even have to have a hijabi. You have, you know, all you have to have done is have modesty requirements imposed upon you, because lots of women aren't exactly forced to cover their hair, but they're still shamed and stigmatized if they show their arms or their legs or even their calves, and you know, and it's a space for them too. So it's
Sorry, you cut out after "it's a space for them too," and then I didn't catch the rest.
Oh, I was just saying that it's really about acceptance. It's really about, you know, about people being able to feel comfortable with how they look and what they want to say about their own bodies and their bodily journeys.
Absolutely. Two things I wanted to bring up. I grew up in the evangelical Christian church in Alabama. And so I see, and it may be that I'm ignorant, and I am certainly ignorant about Islam, but I see a lot of parallels between the hijab and what we often will term purity or modesty culture in the Christian evangelical church. One similarity that I see, which I kind of touched upon when I started this video before you arrived, is it puts the responsibility for avoiding objectification on the woman. The hijab, and not always, right? I don't want to be too broad, but some people use the hijab and requirements for the hijab and exhortations to wear the hijab, just like they used, the no two-piece bikini rule in the summer camps that I went to say, if you don't do this, you will be objectified. We're protecting you from that objectification by putting these requirements on you. To me, this, as a thinking person and a feminist, this is incredibly offensive. That I, as an agent, am supposed to be responsible for what goes on in the mind of another person, and that it's my responsibility to make sure that someone else recognizes my agency, and that would rest upon what I'm wearing. What do you think that that's a fair assessment of hijabi culture, and do you think that that parallel that I see is really there?
I think it's a very fair assessment of one of the sort of modesty doctrines that can be tied to the hijab. The thing is that a lot of people are actually trying to move away from that. I actually know people who wear the hijab for reasons that they consciously claim has nothing to do with the male gaze and has nothing to do with modesty. And I think that's great. But I think that what you've just described is really apt and is really in line with this sort of phenomenon, and I think it even takes it to another level with the hijab, and the sort of attempts to avoid objectification. It ends up sort of reinforcing it. Like we see all these, like, the rhetoric surrounding the hijab often couches it in terms of like protecting. And then there are all these dehumanizing analogies used, like a woman is like a pearl that's protected by her oyster, or a piece of candy. Would you prefer a piece of candy that was unwrapped and passed around, or one that was wrapped? And they are literally comparing women to objects, and objects that you own and consume. And the thing is, it's just, and fundamentally what that is viewing women and their bodies as for other people rather than for themselves. And that's really, I think, where the crux of the issue lies. It's always, you must cover yourself because of what other people will think, because of how other people will perceive you, because of what you will even do to other people, because it's considered that you as a woman are even oppressing men by exposing them to your body. There are arguments along these lines, and all of them are dehumanizing, and all of them just attach this stigma. And speaking of trying to avoid sexual objectification in particular, they tend to end up hypersexualizing the body instead, in the way that, my hair and my arms and even my wrists, if the cloth would kind of slip from my wrists, there would be like moral outrage, like attaching all of this, like just assuming that if people saw my hair and my arms and my collarbone and my ankles, that would somehow be some sort of sexual provocation. Hypersexualizes body parts they're not sexual organs, they're not sexual body parts. And especially when it's done to children, especially when girls start wearing the hijab when they haven't even hit puberty. What are you telling them? What are you saying about their bodies? You're saying that their bodies are sexual objects, and sexual objects of discord that need to be covered up. And really that's where a lot of the stigma and shame was really set in for me, because I started wearing it when I was 8 years old. And before I even knew what sex was, I knew that it was dangerous and harmful for people to look at certain parts of my body, and I didn't know why. Yeah. And another thing in terms of objectification is that a lot of the time, alongside the modesty doctrines, it doesn't kind of boil down to what you're wearing. It also has a lot to do with your behavior, how much you're allowed to interact. If your voice is considered arousing, you can't speak very much. You can't be outspoken. If you want to go places and do things to advance your education, your career that involve a lot of interaction with men, that means you kind of want to limit yourself. You end up basically hiding yourself and being less of a subject and more of an object when you end up having to deny your agency just so that people don't look at you in a sexual way.
Right.
Right. And that's not to say that all hijabis behave this way, because I think that the modesty doctrines and how a hijabi must behave and the sort of levels of modesty and the limitations of interactions, I do believe that these things are evolving. I do believe that more and more women who choose to wear the veil, or even were socialized wearing into the veil, it's acceptable for them to to interact in ways and to get an education and to have jobs and be public speakers and doctors and authority figures and so on. And so they're kind of moving away from the traditional understanding of what modesty ought to be. But unfortunately, in many places in the world, it's still it's still a big thing. It's still a thing that you can't lunch with your male colleagues because that's considered sinful. You can't have friendships with men. You can't have you can't go to places where there will be a lot of mixing, and gender segregation is still a radically enforced norm.
Right.
So yeah.
Something that I wanted to talk about too, especially before we run out of time, is that it's a tricky subject to criticize the veil, I've found. I mean, especially for me as a non-Muslim Western white woman, and as a feminist, a lot of feminists, especially white Western non-Muslim feminists, have come under fire for cultural imperialism, for I mean, you know what that means. Right. As someone who has obviously more standing to talk about it, that doesn't mean that you're exempt from those kinds of criticisms, that You're exempt from accusations that by criticizing the veil, you're doing the same damage that I would be. How do you respond to those accusations or that fear?
Well, I think there's a way to do everything, and I think that I have striven in my work to try to separate between judging women who choose to wear the veil and then critiquing the sort of modesty or the sort of background that support them. Sort of critiquing it as a practice that is enforced in various ways as a social norm, that women are, face various punishments for trying to dissent to, and it doesn't, and people go say, well, that's just that seems to be just such a cop out, because
people say what?
Have I cut out?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was saying that people often say that. Sorry, give me a second. People often say that, well, it's not like you live in Saudi Arabia. There are very few countries that actually enforce the veil by law, and I feel that tends to be a cop-out, because in so many Muslim-majority countries and societies, even like insular communities within the West, you face a lot of stigma and ostracization. You'll become poor. You'll by your family and so on if you try to defy these norms. It's not as clear cut and as simple as it might seem. I mean, I come from Lebanon, which is arguably the most liberal Arab country, and when people think of Beirut, my hometown, they often think that, oh, it's a city of sex and booze and nightclubs, and that's one subsection of it. But I grew up in Hezbollah culture, and for me it was I also lived it where I grew up.
I'm sorry, you cut off again. lived under Hezbollah culture.
Right, and over there, and you know, and it was just as unthinkable, even though there was no sort of legal apparatus, just unthinkable to try to do that. My community, as it would have been if I had been in Saudi Arabia, and I grew up there before moving back to Lebanon. And the thing is, I feel that when there are so many problems and ways in which women, when they get denial that this is a problem that women are forced to veil, I feel like it needs to be talked about. I feel like it needs to be talked about with people who have experience with it, with people who have stake in the matter, and with people who have the requisite background knowledge to differentiate between what is really going on and then the sort of like savior narratives of oh, these women are oppressed just because they happen to wear a veil. That's not the issue at all. It's they're oppressed because they don't have a choice in the matter. It's that they're oppressed because they face all of these really intense power, you know, pressures and structure that kind of dominate every bit of their existence. And the thing about a choice is that even people who go like, well, I choose to wear the veil, you'd have to ask, well, what would happen if you chose otherwise? Is that a free choice if you don't have the capacity to choose otherwise? And I'm sorry about that. And I know that a lot of the problem is that people, I mean, it is a problem. Anti-Muslim bigotry is a problem. The whole white savior narrative is a problem, and ex-Muslim atheists are not exempt from it either. It's not like we don't, you know, it's, I mean, even when I talk about my past wearing a hijab, I have people who talk to me about the person who I was in ways that are denigrating and in ways that just completely ignore, you know, the very real circumstances of my life. They go like, well, you know, maybe you were a stupid person for actually going along with it and for actually wearing it, and you look much better now that you don't have that rag on your head, when the rag on your head thing is a derogatory mark that was used to stigmatize me when I was a kid in school. That's what people used to bully me with, and it's just like you're supremely missing the point. The point is to preserve. Is to try to preserve bodily autonomy, and that means that if women actually have the choice to wear the veil and they want to do it, there's no way that we can, you know, even if we believe that it supports patriarchal values, even if we believe that it supports harmful memes, and that it even propagates those memes, we're still not in a position to police the behavior of other people when it comes to their bodily expression, because that's far more harmful than it would be to assert bodily autonomy, because people are allowed to make bad choices with their bodies. People are allowed to smoke. People are allowed to drink. People are allowed to eat things that you know aren't exactly good for them. People are allowed to objectify themselves if they want to. People are allowed to treat their bodies as they wish, and that's exactly the point. And I feel that if we focus on both sides of it, if we say, well, by talking about the very real detriment that forced hijab poses, and trying to highlight it in you know, and very specifically how it happens with real people that you know, real people whose stories you can become intimate, real people who you aren't othering as part of some you know, foreign culture that is stuck in the Middle Ages, as if we don't have enlightenment and modernity, as if the Middle East is kind of steeped in you know, in nothing but like a marsh of backwards values, and you give voice to the women who actually have experience with these things. I think that serves to humanize it, and I think that once it's humanized, it helps. It's very hard for it to be misused in bigoted ways, because when we are talking about our stories, we're asserting that we have the right to talk about our bodies and our bodily histories, even if it has to do with this doctrine that belongs to a religion that we don't subscribe to, because it's personal, because it happened to us. We have the right to talk about it because it's our bodies and our bodily history. And when we assert that, it means that we, you know, that we are basically you know, we're basically conforming to the values of bodily autonomy for the godless and the godly alike, for the more progressive religious people, for the non-religious people, for the very religious people, for the moderately religious people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're choosing to wear hijab or not wear hijab if the focus is bodily autonomy, I think.
That makes sense. This has been really helpful. You're a very eloquent speaker, and you've clearly thought about these issues a lot. I'm really excited about this project. Where can people keep up with your work?
Okay, so right now I'm at availinthedarkplace.com, and imminently I'm transferring over to the Free Thought blogs. We're kind of just waiting for the new site to be set up before they add a couple of new blogs. I'm affiliated with the Ex-Muslims of North America, that's exmna.org, and a lot of my work can be found there as well. You can follow me on Twitter, and let me think. I have a few interviews and media appearances that are linked to on my blog. I have an interview that came out in Vice magazine yesterday. I will be speaking at SSACon East and the Free Thought Blogs Cons this month, and I'll also be appearing on the American Humanist Association's Humanist Hour at the end of July. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for now.
And what's the Tumblr? The Ex-Hijabi
the Tumblr,
Fashion Journal?
it's just Ex-Hijabi, is it Ex-HijabiFashion.tumblr.com. And it's linked to on my blog, and it's linked to in various places. I'll make sure to post a very prominent link on my blog's homepage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on. This has been a really interesting interview. I really appreciate your thoughts. I'm really excited about the project. I really want it to take off. I think it'll be helpful for people who are Muslims and Muslim curious about the state of the hijab and the paths of people who've chosen to ditch it. So thank you so much again. Have a great one.
Thank you. It's great to be here.